Greetings, fellow Kerbonauts! Nerdy Spaceman here, in for another installment of A Beginner's Guide to Kerbal Space Program. In this episode, we're going to collect a little bit more science, and we're going to do some flights. That'll be flying up and actually getting some air. That's what I say. First things first, I'm going to go ahead and talk about what we researched before. We researched basic rocketry and engineering 101. Engineering 101 was useful because it unlocked the Science Junior, which is an extra science equipment, as well as the stack decoupler, which is going to be really useful for building rockets in this game. It also unlocked two parts, the communitron and the cockpit, which we won't be using, so I won't really go into details about it. In the basic rocketry, it unlocked a bigger solid fuel booster, a liquid fuel booster, and a fuel tank to go with that liquid fuel booster. And I will talk about it when I get to actually building the rocket, and you'll see what I'm talking about and the difference between the liquid and the solid fuel booster. First things first, we're going to go to the VAB, and what we can do is we can actually load previous craft. Now we didn't actually save any craft yet, but it did remember our auto-saved ship. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and I'm going to load it. Now first things first is I'm going to zoom in so I can get a better view. I'm going to add some science equipment to it. The mystery goo is actually part of the starting equipment, but I didn't talk about it in the previous video because it has a particular property that makes it slightly different from the other equipment. I'm going to go ahead and click on that and place it on the side of the ship. Now this is important that you use the angle snap, and the angle snap is this button down here, and when you click it, it should be a hexagon. If you click it again, it'll be a circle. Now the difference between that is when it's a circle, it'll give you smooth motion, but when you give it angle snap, it'll be the hexagon, it'll be locking into particular degrees. So for example, if this is 0 degrees, the next notch over would be 15. The next notch over would be 30, then 45, and you'll notice that at the 45 degree, it's exactly 45 degrees. And that's extremely useful, especially when it comes to building symmetric rockets. It is very desirable to have that be that way. So I'm going to go ahead and put it on the back of the craft, up near the top there, and you'll actually be able to reach it when you hop out of the craft. You'll be able to reach it through the craft and get the science from inside of it and to put back into the pod. And that'll be super useful later on, and I'll talk about it later. I'm going to go ahead and take the Science Junior, and I'm going to throw that on the bottom here, and that is how you use these little circles here. These are attaching nodes, so they'll attach to it, and they're usually attached on the line of the craft, so you can build taller and taller rockets. The mystery goo, they attach on the side. They're attached radially, and you can put them anywhere you want on the rocket, to whichever way you want to. But the center ones, the circular ones, they can't be attached on the side without giving you a little bit of wonky, problematic issues. But generally, you want to attach them to vertically like that. Now this is a good little start. I'm going to go ahead and launch this, but before I do, I always have to check who my crew is. Usually, again, by default, Jebediah is put inside, and we don't want Jebediah because we want our scientist Bob Kerman. And when we launch, I'll tell you exactly why we want him. For one, he gives you slightly more science. That's pretty good in its own right, but the most important thing is he can reset certain experiments. For example, the mystery goo. When you observe the mystery goo, it collects science the same way as every other experiment. You can keep it, and it'll be stored in there. The same thing is for the materials Junior. That opens up, and again, it tells you just the way you normally would. You can keep that data. But interestingly enough, when you do an EVA with Bob, and you climb up and right-click on these, you can collect the data off of that. So you will actually be able to take the data out of the mystery goo and put it in your crew capsule for you to deliver back to the planet. Meanwhile, you can take more goo data, collect that and put it in the pod, and keep doing this over and over until you've collected all of the different biomes that you've flown through. It's extremely useful. So I'm going to go ahead and collect that data, but it's going to give me a warning. This warning means that the containment unit will be inoperable when you collect the data. But never fear, our scientists can actually restore it. So normally, if I were a pilot, I'll be able to remove the data, and this is about as far as I'll go. But lucky for us, scientists can also restore the goo. So by clicking on the restore button, we reset the experiment so we can collect more goo along the way. And only scientists can do this, and that is why we want a scientist in every mission. If you try to collect the junior from all the way up here, you can't reach it, so you're going to have to actually inch your way down the ladder using the WASD keys until you can reach it, and there it is. Then you can collect that data. It'll give you the same error. You can remove it and restore it, and everything is hunky-dory. Now, these two are the only two experiments that actually require you to reset them, but other experiments, they can just be collected and reused as many times as you want to. They usually involve much less complicated experiments like a thermometer or a barometer or other such equipment. But for us, that's the only major important part. And again, once we have the stored data, we can always right-click on the pod and store the experiments, and then go back to doing more science. What we can do is actually a bit of a cool mechanic, is when you're holding onto the ladder, and whether you're on the ground or flying with parachutes, and so long as you're holding on the ladder, your Kerbal thinks he is flying. So if you do an EVA report, it'll tell you that you're flying over the shores. Technically, we're not flying, we're on the ground, but because you're holding on the ladder, it thinks that we're flying on the shores. Now I'm zooming out real far, and it thinks, here it is, it thinks we're on the shores, and we're flying there, either with an airplane, or a parachute, or any other vehicle. It thinks we're currently flying. It's going to give us extra science for that. And we need every bit of science that we can. So we're going to go ahead and keep that data from the shores. And we're going to board and recover our vessel. This is going to give us some extra science that we can unlock even more parts with. And here it is. So we've got material study, we've got a mystery goo, and also we've got flying data. That's interesting because it's a different type of data. It's not landed data, it's flying. Again, flying gives you different biomes. And you can have a different biome in the upper atmosphere too. So there's plenty of science to collect if you know where to look for it. Now, with all this newfound science, I'm going to go ahead and unlock survivability to add bigger, badder parachutes. It also unlocks the heat shield, which is also extremely important for us, as well as the service bay, radiator panels, and landing legs. We probably won't be using any of the parts aside from the heat shield and the extra parachute. So I'm going to go ahead and research this one with the remaining of our science. Then I'm going to close this, and I'm going to go build ourselves a rocket with this newfound parts. First things first, I'm going to have to add parachutes, because on the way back down, we want to land. I'm going to add the Mark 16 parachute, because it is a linear parachute. Strap it on, look how perfectly it fits right on top of the pod. But we're still pretty heavy, so I'm going to add 2 radial mount parachutes. Now I can add these one at a time, the same way I added the mystery goo, or if I push this symmetry mode, or using the X key, which is the hotkey for it, I can do two-way symmetry, and I can place down 2 parachutes. Now I can also do more than just two-way symmetry. For example, if I take something more visible, let's see here, the fins here, if I put and I look down from the top, this would be two-way symmetry. If I push the X again, it'll give me 3-way symmetry, and then pushing the X again gives me more different types of symmetries, all the way up to 8-way symmetry. After that, it resets back to regular or no symmetry. So that is how you change the symmetry mode. Now this pod is almost ready. It needs one final touch, and that is the heat shield. And there we go. This pod is now completely ready to fly up and go back down into the atmosphere. Now, this can't fly on its own because it needs to actually get to space somehow. Now, the best way to get into space is to attach an engine on it. And I'm going to start by attaching something very similar, very simple, and that is the Flea Solid Fuel Booster. The Flea Solid Fuel Booster, and there's a difference here, I don't want to attach it all the way up here because that actually attaches it to a different part. I want to attach it to the very bottom of the rocket, and it'll give you these cool little fairings there. Now the solid fuel booster, when you right click on it, it actually has a thrust limiter and solid fuel. This solid fuel is built into the engine, and much like a firework, once you light it, it doesn't stop burning. You can't control how fast it's burning, and you can't switch it off. It'll actually tell you here in the Flea, when you right click and it gives you the extra information, it'll say that the engine cannot be shut down in big orange text. So you have to be careful when you put them. They usually do great as lifting bodies, as just lifting your craft off of the ground and into the sky. But Ideally, we don't want this attached to us when we're coming back down to the planet because we've got this awesome little heat shield to protect us. Plus, once it's empty, it's just dead weight. So the way you control that is you can click it and push it off to the side here. You can go to structural, and this was, by the way, it was in the engines, this solid fuel booster. You can go to structural, select the stack decoupler, and place it underneath the heat shield. This will give us a decoupling action, and when we put the solid fuel booster down there, it's going to give us different stages. When this runs out of fuel, we can stage, and this will detach from the decoupler, like so, and we'll be left with nothing but the pod and the heat shield, which is exactly what we need to come back down. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and leave it like this, and we're ready to go. Now, a couple of things to know before you launch a craft that can actually fly is you have to know about these three buttons: the center of mass, center of thrust, and center of lift. All three of these need to be switched on before you launch to make sure that everything's functioning. You can then switch them off when you're done with them, and you can launch. They won't appear when you're flying, but during construction they're extremely important. Now, so far we only see two. That's because our center of lift is attached to the floor because we don't have actually any lift produced by any of the bodies here. That's not ideal, and we always want to have a center of lift. So I'm going to go ahead and add some fins. I think adding the two-way, or better yet, four-way symmetry would be most ideal. And I'll put them on the bottom of the rocket. This is the order that you want these things to be in. You want your center of mass to always be on top, or always be in the direction of travel that you intend to go. You want your center of lift behind the center of mass, and it doesn't matter where the center of thrust is, so long as it's in a perfectly straight line and everything is perfectly straight. That is what you want. This is a number one safest way to fly a rocket, is to have your center of mass first, center of lift second, and the thrust in line with the two of them. That is how you make a stable craft, and that is how you get it to fly straight and steady. Now I can switch these off, knowing that our craft works, and I can do one little check during the stages. Now when this decouples, we're not going to have a center of lift anymore or a center of thrust, but we will still have a center of mass, and there it is in the center. Now this is okay, but there's a possibility that this might want to flip itself over. That's quite alright because we probably won't be traveling too fast for that to be an issue, but during lengthier missions that are more complicated, that's going to be extremely important. But for now, we don't have to worry about that. You'll see how your center of mass changes when your craft has different parts attached to it. As you can know, when you add a bunch of fuel and everything on the bottom, it'll change everything. Now, lastly, we want to talk about staging. These are the stages. The first stage is going to switch on the booster and decouple. We don't want that. We want the booster to be firmly attached to our rocket and only decouple after we run out of fuel. So that to do that, we have to click an extra stage button. The plus always creates a stage right below the stage that you added the plus on. So if I add a plus down here, it'll add a stage below us, or if I add a plus up here, it'll add a stage above us. Ideally, you want it between these two, because what we're going to do is we're going to launch the rocket first and then decouple it. So I'm going to use the minus to get rid of this empty stage, and I'm going to click and drag the decoupler up to this level. What's to know is you actually start from the highest stage and work your way down. So it'll be solid fuel booster first, then we will decouple it, and then we will activate our parachutes as we fall back down. You can decouple and do all the stages at your own speed, and they will be activated with the space key, which is the stage key. Now I'm going to go ahead and call this the Pike. The Pike. Pike. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and save this craft and make sure that we have Bob Kerbin on the inside. And let's launch this thing and collect some science. Now here we are, and what we can do is we can push the space button and it'll launch us. Once we're launching, we're going to fly in a straight line, straight up, and we're not going to do anything to it because this is how you fly up through the air, and you will quickly run out of fuel because you have a small little engine there. Once you're out of fuel, you can push the spacebar again to decouple it, and you're left with just the pod. And this will keep going up until our speed decreases down to 0, and then we'll turn around and fall back down. But before we do that, I say we collect science from up here. I'm going to go ahead and observe the mystery goo, and it's going to tell me that it's flying while at Kerbin, or while flying at Kerbin. I keep that data, and then we're going to go ahead and observe the materials bay, and that's going to also say flying at Kerbin. Keep that. We are then going to do a crew report, which is going to say flying over the shores. So it's going to be able to differentiate between the shores and the grasslands and different things. So crew reports understand different biomes. So we can go ahead and keep that data. And now we're falling down pretty quickly. I'm going to push the stage key again to open our parachutes, and they're going to slow us down. Eventually they will deploy. Here they are. And they'll reduce our speed by a whole bunch. At this point, what we can do is we can do some more experiments. We can do an EVA report, and we can right-click and do an EVA report. But you'll notice we don't get any science, but that's because we've already collected science while flying over Kerbin's shores. So we will get no more science. So we're going to go ahead and reset the experiment. We did that while we were at the launch pad in the beginning of the episode. And that's what happens when you collect science from the same place multiple times. Oh well, that's quite alright. We're going to go ahead and board and wait for us to hit the ground. Unfortunately, this is going to take quite some time as our parachutes are deployed all the way up here and we're moving extremely slowly because the parachutes are very effective. So to speed up time, I can click these arrows here and it will warp us at 4 times speed. You'll notice we're falling down much faster than normal. We're still traveling at the exact same speed, but we've warped time, so we're moving at 4 times. This can also be controlled with the less than and greater than keys on the keyboard, or the comma and period keys, depending on how you look at it. They're both the same button. But this will speed up time. Now, ideally, you want to reduce it down to regular speed when you hit the ground, and so that because the physics gets a little weird when you do 4 times physics. So it's always a safe bet to speed up time a little bit or slow down time. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with the hotkey, and there it is, and we have touchdown. I can then recover our craft and collect that juicy science of flight. And there it is. We have collected a whole bunch of science. I'm going to go ahead and keep that. And that's enough for this episode. This is Nerdy Spaceman. Stay safe and fly far.